Welcome back to Kafka Internal's Crashcasts. I'm your host Sheila, and today we're continuing our journey through the deep dive into Kafka Producers chapter. We're joined by our Kafka expert Victor to explore the fascinating world of producer configurations and their performance impact. Victor, are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely, Sheila. I'm excited to unravel the intricacies of Kafka producer configurations and how they can make or break your system's performance.
Great. Before we start, listeners, make sure you're familiar with basic Kafka concepts like topics, partitions, and the general role of producers. Now, let's kick things off with a quiz question. What producer configuration can improve throughput but potentially increase latency? Think about it, and we'll reveal the answer at the end of the episode.
That's an excellent question, Sheila. It really gets to the heart of the trade-offs we often face when configuring Kafka producers. I'm curious to see how many of our listeners can guess the correct answer.
Me too, Victor. Now, let's start with the basics. Can you explain what we mean by producer configurations and why they're important?
Certainly. Producer configurations are settings that determine how a Kafka producer behaves when sending messages to Kafka brokers. They're crucial because they directly impact performance, reliability, and resource utilization. Think of it like tuning a car for different types of races. You'd configure it differently for a drag race versus an endurance race.
That's a great analogy. So, what are some of the key configurations we should be aware of?
The most important ones are batch size, linger time, compression type, acknowledgments, and retries. Each of these plays a significant role in shaping the producer's behavior and performance.
Could you break those down for us? Let's start with batch size and linger time.
Sure thing. Batch size determines the maximum number of bytes that will be batched together before sending to the broker. Linger time is the maximum time to wait before sending a batch, even if it's not full. These two work together to control batching, which can significantly improve throughput at the cost of some latency.
Interesting. So it's a trade-off between throughput and latency. How does compression type fit into this?
Great question. Compression type allows you to compress the batches of messages before sending them to the broker. This can reduce network bandwidth usage and potentially improve throughput, but it comes at the cost of some CPU usage for compression and decompression.
I see. And what about acknowledgments and retries? They sound like they might be related to reliability.
You're spot on, Sheila. The acknowledgments configuration determines how many confirmations the producer requires from the broker before considering a message as sent successfully. It can be set to none, one, or all. The retries setting determines how many times the producer will attempt to resend a message if the first attempt fails.
That makes sense. So, higher acknowledgement values and more retries increase reliability but might impact performance, right?
Exactly. It's another trade-off between reliability and performance. Now here's a fun fact. The default value for batch size in Kafka is 16 kilobytes. This might be surprising to some, as it's relatively small compared to the message sizes in many real-world applications.
That is interesting. Speaking of real-world applications, can you give us an example of how these configurations might be tuned in practice?
Certainly. Imagine you're building a real-time analytics system that needs to process millions of events per second. In this case, you might increase the batch size and linger time to improve throughput, use compression to reduce network usage, and potentially set acknowledgments to 1 to balance between reliability and performance. However, if you're building a financial transaction system, you might prioritize reliability by setting acknowledgments to all and increasing the number of retries, even if it means sacrificing some throughput.
Those examples really help put things into perspective. Are there any common pitfalls or misunderstandings about producer configurations that our listeners should be aware of?
One common mistake is assuming that simply increasing batch size will always improve performance. In reality, if your messages are small or infrequent, a large batch size might actually lead to increased latency without any throughput benefit. Another misconception is that setting acknowledgments to none for maximum performance is always a good idea. While it can increase throughput, It also means you have no guarantee that messages are actually received by the broker.
Those are great points, Victor. As we wrap up, could you share some best practices for tuning producer configurations?
Absolutely. First, always benchmark your specific use case. Kafka's performance can vary greatly depending on your message sizes, frequencies, and overall system architecture. Second, consider using the Kafka producer interceptors to monitor the performance impact of your configurations. Lastly, remember that Kafka is often just one part of a larger system. Sometimes, optimizing other components can have a bigger impact than fine-tuning Kafka configurations.
Thank you, Victor. Those are excellent tips. Now, let's reveal the answer to our quiz question. What producer configuration can improve throughput but potentially increase latency? The answer is linger time. Increasing linger time allows more messages to be batched together, improving throughput, but it also means messages might wait longer before being sent, potentially increasing latency.
Great explanation, Sheila. I hope our listeners found that question thought-provoking.
To summarize today's episode, we've learned about key Kafka producer configurations like batch size, linger time, compression type, acknowledgments, and retries. We've discussed how these configurations impact performance and reliability, and we've explored the trade-offs involved in tuning them. Remember, there's no one-size-fits-all configuration. It always depends on your specific use case and requirements. In our next episode, we'll be diving into serializers, partitions, and keys in Kafka producers. Until then, keep experimenting with your Kafka configurations. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Kafka Internals Crashcasts and leave us a rating. Your support helps us continue creating in-depth Kafka content. Thanks for listening.